October 23rd, 1702. A narrow channel on the northwest coast of Spain. Admiral George Rooke stares at an obstacle no naval commander has ever been asked to break. Stretching across the mouth of Rande Strait, a monstrous boom of chains, spars and timber blocks the only path to the richest fleet in the world. Behind it, 15 French warships wait in battle formation. On either shore, cannon batteries command every inch of water, and at anchor behind all of it, the Spanish treasure fleet, carrying the silver wealth of the entire New World. Rooke has 6,000 men, a fleet stretched thin after a humiliating failure at Cadiz, and a reputation that desperately needs saving. His orders from London leave no room for hesitation. His career cannot survive another disaster. What happens in the next 4 hours will be one of the most spectacular naval victories in British history, a battle where bold leadership, devastating firepower, and unexpected fortune combine to crush two nations' fleets in a single afternoon and change the balance of power in Europe forever. This is the Battle of Vigo Bay. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic naval engagements of the War of the Spanish Succession, a battle where British naval supremacy shattered a Franco-Spanish fleet, captured a legendary treasure, and turned military humiliation into immortal triumph. Because Vigo Bay wasn't simply a fleet action, it was about empire, silver, and the kind of audacious naval thinking that would make Britain the master of the oceans for the next 2 centuries. But before we watch HMS Torbay smash through that boom, before we see the Bourbon fleet burning in the bay, we need to understand the extraordinary chain of events that brought 2 great fleets to a remote corner of Galicia. Because without grasping the strategic stakes, the silver that financed wars, the alliance that hung in the balance, the reputation that rode on a single commander's decision, you cannot truly appreciate what the Royal Navy achieved that October afternoon. And if you enjoy this kind of deep naval history, the battles that built Britain's maritime empire, make sure you're subscribed. We cover the engagements that shaped a nation, from the Channel skirmishes that saved Elizabeth's England, to the fleet actions that secured Britannia's rule of the waves. Let's begin in 1700, when Spain's King Carlos II died without an heir and plunged Europe into crisis. The dying king had willed his entire empire, Spain, the Spanish Netherlands, the vast colonies of the Americas, to Philip of Anjou, the grandson of Louis XIV of France. A Bourbon king ruling both France and Spain meant a Bourbon superpower dominating the continent. For England and the Dutch Republic, this was an existential threat. The Grand Alliance was formed, and the War of the Spanish Succession began. The stakes were enormous. Whoever controlled Spain controlled the transatlantic treasure trade. Every year the Spanish treasure fleet, the Flota de Indias, sailed from the Americas laden with silver from the mines of Mexico and Peru. This silver financed everything: armies, navies, diplomacy. If France could protect this lifeline, Louis XIV could wage war indefinitely. If England could sever it, the Bourbon war machine would eventually starve. Admiral George Rooke understood this perfectly when he sailed for southern Spain in the summer of 1702. His orders were to seize Cadiz, Spain's premier Atlantic port, the home base of the treasure fleet. With Cadiz in British hands, England would control the entire strategic approach to the Mediterranean and strangle Bourbon sea power before it could consolidate. It was a bold strategic vision. The execution proved rather less impressive. The Cadiz expedition of September 1702 was a masterclass in how not to conduct an amphibious operation. Poor coordination between naval and land forces, indecisive leadership, and an embarrassing breakdown of military discipline among the troops ashore turned a promising operation into a fiasco. English soldiers, discovering wine cellars in the churches they were supposed to be protecting, staged an impromptu festival. The city's defences held. Rooke withdrew in shame. The fleet turned for home, carrying failure and recrimination where it had hoped to carry victory and Spanish gold. The humiliation could not have come at a worse time. England was new to this war, still building the coalitions and credibility she would need. A failed expedition against an unprepared Spanish port suggested that British arms were not the irresistible force her diplomats were claiming in European capitals. Rooke needed something to restore British prestige. What he received instead was intelligence, the kind of intelligence that transforms careers and changes history. While watering at Lagos on Portugal's southern coast, Rooke received word that the Spanish treasure fleet had arrived in Spain. The convoy had left Veracruz, Mexico, on June 11th, carrying over 100 million pieces of 8 in silver, a fortune almost beyond calculation. It had gathered at Havana and crossed the Atlantic in convoy, escorted by a powerful French squadron under Admiral George Rooke. Originally destined for Cadiz, the fleet had received news of the British presence in southern waters and diverted north to Vigo Bay, a deep fjord-like inlet on Galicia's rugged coast. The silver had arrived on September 23rd. 1 month later, much of it was reportedly still aboard. Rooke conferred with his Dutch co-commander, Admiral Philips van Almond. The season was late, his ships were tired, his men had suffered the humiliation of Cadiz. Every reasonable argument pointed toward returning to England and trying again next year. Rooke chose differently. He turned his fleet north. What awaited him at Vigo tested naval courage to its limits. Chateau Renaud was not incompetent. He had used the month since arrival to transform the inner bay into a fortress. The key was the Rande Strait, the narrow channel connecting the outer bay to the inner harbour where the treasure fleet lay at anchor. It was barely 500 yards wide at its narrowest point, flanked by hills commanded by shore batteries on both sides and blocked by the boom. The boom itself was an engineering achievement of genuine sophistication. It was not simply chained logs, but a composite structure of masts, spars, heavy iron chains and barrels, designed to absorb and deflect the impact of any vessel attempting to force it. At each end, Chateau Renaud had anchored his 2 largest warships, the Bourbon and the Espérance, their broadsides aimed directly at anything approaching the barrier. Behind the boom, 5 more ships of the line waited in line abreast, their guns covering every yard of the strait. In total, 15 French warships and a handful of Spanish vessels guarded the treasure. The shore batteries added 30 more guns to the defensive equation. Chateau Renaud was confident. The position was almost certainly impregnable to conventional attack. An enemy fleet trying to force the Rande Strait would face devastating fire from front and both sides simultaneously, in water too confined for proper manoeuvre. It was, on paper, a killing ground. Rooke saw it differently. He had not sailed this far to sail home again. His plan was elegant in its ambition and terrifying in its demands. 2 operations would run simultaneously. A land force under the Duke of Ormond, James Butler, Ireland's Lord Lieutenant, would go ashore to the north of the strait and assault the shore batteries directly. Without those batteries, the boom became merely an obstacle rather than a death trap. At the same moment, the naval assault would go in. The timing had to be perfect. On the morning of October 23rd, some 2,000 soldiers under Ormond rowed ashore through grey October swells. Their target was Fort Rande on the southern shore and the battery positions on the northern bank, stone walls and earthworks manned by Spanish regulars who had no intention of surrendering the gateway to 100 million pieces of 8. Grenadiers under Lord Shannon led the assault on the fort itself. The fighting was sharp and fierce, the kind of close-quarters infantry action that wins or loses battles in minutes. Shannon's men carried the outer walls, fought through the defenders, and silenced the battery that had commanded the southern approach to the boom. While the soldiers were still fighting on shore, Rooke ordered the naval assault to begin. Rear Admiral Thomas Hobson commanded the breakthrough force. His flagship, HMS Torbay, was a 60-gun third-rate, powerful enough to punch through opposition, fast enough to carry momentum through the barrier. With a favourable wind filling her sails and her gun ports open, Torbay bore down on the boom at full speed. Her crew knew exactly what they were sailing into. The French warships on either side of the barrier opened fire. The shore batteries that Shannon's men had not yet silenced added to the storm. Torbay ran the gauntlet. She hit the boom at speed and broke through. The barrier, for all its engineering, could not withstand the impact of a 60-gun warship under full sail. The chains snapped, the spars shattered, the barrels were driven aside. Torbay burst through into the inner channel and found herself alone, momentarily isolated, the French squadron on 3 sides, and the wreckage of the boom behind her. Then came one of those moments where fortune tests a commander and a crew in the same instant. A French fireship, a vessel deliberately set ablaze and steered into the enemy, came alongside Torbay. Fireships were among the most feared weapons in the naval arsenal. The Dutch had used them to devastating effect against English fleets a generation earlier. A fireship alongside a wooden warship, in confined waters with nowhere to manoeuvre, was a death sentence. The fireship caught. Flames ran up Torbay's rigging. Then something extraordinary happened. The French fireship was carrying a cargo of snuff, tobacco destined for the European market, filling her holds instead of standard combustibles. As the fire spread and the snuff ignited, it created not an inferno, but an enormous billowing cloud of dark powder that smothered the flames rather than feeding them. The fire died. Torbay's crew, coughing and half-blinded, fought their way clear. The ship survived. It was, by any rational analysis, an accident of cargo manifests. But for the British sailors who fought through it, and the officers who wrote home about it afterward, it felt like something else entirely. Confirmation that God was watching over the English fleet that October day. Torbay's breakthrough was the signal. The rest of the British and Dutch fleet poured through the broken boom. Chateau Renaud saw his defensive position unravel within minutes. The shore batteries were falling silent as Ormond's soldiers overran the remaining positions. The boom was gone. The inner harbour was no longer a fortress, it was a trap. He made the decision that every admiral fears making. He ordered his fleet burned. French warships caught fire one after another along the shoreline. Spanish vessels ran themselves aground to prevent capture. The bay filled with smoke, the crackle of burning timber, the occasional roar as powder magazines caught and ships disintegrated in fountains of fire and debris. It was a magnificent and terrible sight, the systematic destruction of two nations' naval power in an afternoon. But British and Dutch sailors working through the night saved what could be saved. Several French warships were boarded before the flames took hold. Spanish merchant vessels were seized, and the treasure, what remained of it, was taken. The aftermath required a careful accounting. The Spanish had not been idle during the month since the fleet's arrival at Vigo, working against the grain of their own bureaucracy, which insisted that proper customs officials must supervise any unloading, and proper customs officials had to travel from Seville. They had nonetheless managed to transfer a substantial portion of the silver to shore and into the interior before Rooke arrived. Modern historians estimate that somewhere between 13 and 20 million silver pesos had already been removed when the battle occurred. What remained was still extraordinary. The official accounting of treasure handed to the Royal Mint in London recorded 4,504 pounds of silver and 7.5 pounds of gold, the solid precious metal that had survived both the burning and the looting that accompanied any naval action of the period. Beyond this, substantial quantities of a silver coin, cochineal, indigo, and other colonial trade goods were seized from the surviving merchant vessels. The total British financial gain has been debated by historians for 3 centuries. Contemporary estimates ranged wildly, from respectable to astronomical. What is beyond dispute is the symbolic value of what was taken, and what that symbol was worth to a nation that had just suffered the embarrassment of Cadiz. Isaac Newton was master of the mint. The greatest mathematical mind of the age received the captured silver at the Tower of London, assessed it with characteristic precision, and put it to work in the most visible way possible. He struck special commemorative coins, gold guineas and silver crowns, bearing beneath the Queen's portrait a single word: Vigo. Every coin was a declaration. Every transaction that passed one of Newton's Vigo pieces from hand to hand announced to the world that Queen Anne's England had faced the Bourbon fleet, broken its defences, and taken its treasure. The gold Vigo 5 guinea pieces were struck from barely 7.5 pounds of metal. Today, a single specimen can command £1 million at auction, testimony to a battle's power to outlast the men who fought it. The strategic consequences extended far beyond prize money and commemorative coins. The Battle of Vigo Bay had a profound effect on Portugal, and Portugal's decision would shape the entire course of the war. Portugal had been cautiously neutral, caught between French diplomatic pressure and British commercial influence. The Portuguese court watched Vigo with careful attention. They had seen the Royal Navy crush a French fleet in a defended harbour, seize a legendary treasure, and do it all in a single October afternoon. French naval protection, the guarantee on which any Portuguese alignment with the Bourbons would have to rest, had just been demonstrated to be worthless. The Methuen Treaty followed in 1703. Portugal joined the Grand Alliance. British warships gained the use of Lisbon Harbour, which transformed the entire Mediterranean strategic picture. From Lisbon, the Royal Navy could operate in the Mediterranean year-round, support Allied operations in Spain and Italy, and project power in ways previously impossible. Within a year, British forces had seized Gibraltar. The gateway to the inland sea was open. The Methuen Treaty also created the famous trade relationship that would tie the two nations together for generations: Portuguese wine flowing to Britain, British wool flowing to Portugal, a commercial partnership forged in the aftermath of a battle. For Chateau Renaud's career, Vigo was the end. The admiral who had transported 100 million pieces of eight across the Atlantic, without losing a ship to enemy action, who had then seen his fleet destroyed in an afternoon, bore the weight of France's humiliation. He was not court-martialed. The defensive position had been as strong as he could make it, but his active naval career concluded at Rande Strait. For Rooke, Vigo was salvation and triumph combined. The man who had skulked away from Cadiz returned to England as a national hero. The victory was celebrated in coffeehouses and pamphlets, toasted in taverns from London to Edinburgh, Parliament approved, the Queen rewarded. And somewhere in the administrative machinery of the Royal Mint, Isaac Newton carefully recorded 7.5 pounds of gold and struck history into coin. The wreck of Santo Cristo de Maracaibo, a Spanish galleon seized by British sailors and subsequently lost on rocks near the Seas Islands while being sailed out of the bay, has tantalised treasure hunters ever since. Throughout the 19th century, British and American salvage companies sent divers into Vigo Bay with brass diving bells and optimistic prospectuses. Some found cannonballs. One Scottish adventurer named Isaac Dixon reportedly recovered enough silver in 1825 to purchase a country estate he named Dollar House. The Spanish government today designates the bay as a protected archaeological site, which has brought legal clarity to the treasure question, if not the treasure itself. What Vigo demonstrated was the character of British naval power at its finest. Rooke had every reason to turn for home. The season was late, his fleet was tired, his reputation could not afford another failure. He attacked instead. Hobson drove a 60-gun ship at full speed into a defended boom. The soldiers under Ormond carried shore positions against determined resistance. In every dimension, strategic decision, tactical execution, individual courage, British arms performed with distinction. The Royal Navy that fought at Vigo was becoming something new, a professional force with doctrine, institutional memory of victory, and commanders who understood that boldness was not recklessness, but calculation. Rooke knew his fleet could break the boom if the shore batteries were silenced first. He trusted Ormond. He trusted Hobson. The plan worked because every piece of it worked, coordinated across land and sea, in confined waters, against a prepared enemy. The battle entered British popular culture with remarkable speed. Songs were written, sermons were preached, the Vigo coins circulated through every level of society. In an age before newspapers could carry accurate battle illustrations, the coins did the work of images, physical objects that ordinary people could hold and connect to a victory their country had won. The quiet bay at Vigo is peaceful farmland and fishing harbour today. Pleasure boats move through Rande Strait, where Torbay once smashed through chains and timber. The hills that housed the batteries are forested, the fort long since dissolved into the landscape. Beneath the water, somewhere in the silt and the kelp, lie cannon and timbers from both fleets. French warships that burned at their anchors, Spanish galleons scuttled by their crews, the scattered wreckage of an afternoon that changed European history. But understand what happened there. A British admiral, facing professional ruin, chose attack over retreat. A British rear admiral drove his ship through defensive barriers no commander had forced before. British soldiers stormed shore positions while British sailors broke a boom and between them they destroyed the Bourbon naval presence in Atlantic waters and seized a treasure that Newton himself turned into British coin. This is what British naval power looked like at its finest, not the overwhelming might of a later century, but something sharper and more audacious. The willingness to strike when every reasonable argument said wait, to trust the plan, to trust the men, and to drive through the boom before the enemy could reload. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The stories that mattered told the way they deserved.